Welcome to our series of Flap TV debates. Today we have the debate for the 3rd Congressional District in Massachusetts. We have Republican Rick Green of Pepperell, and we have independent candidate Mike Mullen of Maynard. Hi. Thank you both for joining us. We were supposed to have Lori Trahan, the Democrat. She did accept the invitation, was committed to it, and then withdrew after learning that Mr. Green was going to be here. So it's unfortunate, but we're going to continue with the debate anyway and thank the two candidates who did show up and willing to answer questions for the voters of this area. So we're going to get right to it. Issue 1, Donald Trump is asking Congress to consider raising the gas tax in order to fund infrastructure projects. Road conditions are a major concern for Fitchburg area voters. Would you vote for a gas tax increase in order to get more federal dollars for roads and bridges? Mr. Mullen.
I'd prefer an alternative approach. Representative Curbelo in Florida has proposed what's called the Market Choice Act, and that is basically a carbon tax to help reduce climate change. And he has a plan to have 25% go to the Treasury and the other 75% to go to other areas, and about 50% of that is for the Highway Trust Fund. So I think that would be a way to remove the gas tax, which is a little bit more regressive, and still fund that. So I think that'd be a great way to move forward with helping the environment and also build out the funds for the infrastructure.
Mr. Green.
Well, absolutely. We need to focus on our infrastructure. Route 2 here in Fitchburg, I've proposed we're going to take Route 2 from a 2-lane to a 3-lane divided access, limited access highway, open up the Fitchburg-Gardner area to development, and really open up the economy. I think the most important thing is you look at the Concord Rotary on Route 2, you go back to Mass DOT's website, you can see every 8 years for the last 24 or 32 years, they have studies on there of how they're going to fix that rotary. But then they try and line up the federal regulatory approvals. It takes more than 8 years, and the traffic study runs out, and at the end they have to go back and redo the traffic study. So for the last 24, 32 years, we've been spending millions of dollars on studying this problem. I actually believe we can get a lot of these projects done without raising taxes at all.
Great. Mr. Green, do you support continued federal funding for Planned Parenthood?
Look, I don't think the federal government should be subsidizing any businesses, plain and simple. You know, if there's a need for the service, then the folks can, they can handle that on their own.
Okay, Mr. Mullen.
I would support federal funding of Planned Parenthood. I think it offers a lot of services that are needed in a lot of areas that otherwise people can't get.
Very good. As a member of Congress, you would vote on constitutional amendments. Would you support a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and get corporate money and soft money out of politics? Mr. Mullen.
I would. I'm voting yes on question 2 on the Massachusetts ballot this fall. As an independent, electoral reform, political reform is one of my big concerns, so I would support that. I also think we need to enforce the existing disclosure laws that are already on the books. I think we need to have a more inclusive tent from a political aspect, and I think that would help.
Mr. Green.
I'm a full supporter of the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments, I think, are vital to our constitutional democracy. I would not support any amendment which does anything to, do anything to the First Amendment or change it in any way.
Issue 4, Massachusetts has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. Some advocates are calling for Congress to make Massachusetts the model for federal laws. Would you support those efforts to base federal law to mirror Massachusetts law, or do you feel Massachusetts law is already too restrictive?
So, look, I think one-size-fits-all prescriptions coming out of Washington, D.C. generally don't work. Regardless of what the issue is, I don't think you would want to tell people in Texas that they have to abide by what's going on in Massachusetts, just as I know the folks here in Massachusetts and Fitchburg wouldn't want to be told by the folks in Texas that they have to live by their laws. So I'm a big supporter of the 10th Amendment on that one.
Mr. Mullen.
I think there are a lot of good things in the Massachusetts laws. I think one thing we need to do in the area of gun violence is empower and fund the CDC to fund it like the public health issue that it is. So that would be one of my top priorities in that area. I think we need universal background checks, and I'd be supportive of the reinstating the assault ban weapon.
Issue 5, if Donald Trump fires a special prosecutor investigating possible foreign influence in the 2016 election, do you believe he is acting within his legal powers as president, or do you believe that would be obstruction of justice? And if you believe the latter, would you support, as a member of Congress, articles of impeachment if he were to use his powers to cut off an active investigation?
I think it's probably within his powers. I don't think it's what's best for the nation. As far as articles of impeachment, I need to see what's in those articles before voting for that.
Yeah, look, I don't think dealing with the hypotheticals is at all helpful. I think we can all agree what's going on in D.C. right now is a circus. I'm running to fix the roads and bridges, to fix Route 2, to help the people of Fitchburg, to improve the economy, to deal with the opioid crisis. Dealing with these hypotheticals, you know, there's absolutely no evidence, and to even speak to a topic like that at this point, I think, is ridiculous.
You mentioned the opioid epidemic. That's actually our next question. That is issue 6. How do you deal with the opioid epidemic? Are you coming at it more from an enforcement point of view or more from a treatment point of view?
Both. So there's a lot being done. Treatment and education, absolutely vital. I looked at our existing congressional delegation as a businessman. We don't have anyone in our congressional delegation who has a staff member whose job is the opioid crisis. Day one, I appoint somebody. That's all they're responsible for. But two, no one's talking about the fact that opiates is a business. It's an illegal business, but it's a business and a distribution business. I created a distribution business. I grew it from 0 to 500 jobs with my brother over the last 20 years. I compete against the likes of Amazon.com. I have a unique ability to understand what it takes to disrupt the supply chain for these folks, to drive up the cost and make it, you know, make it so they don't want to do business, and clean the fentanyl off our streets. The fentanyl is what's killing people. I'll get that garbage off the streets, keep our kids safe.
Mr. Mullen.
Well, first, on the enforcement side of things, I want to congratulate law enforcement. I think yesterday or day before, there was a big bust up in the Lawrence area. Over 50 people were arrested. They took 10 kilos of fentanyl off the streets, and as Rick said, that's really what's become the accelerator on the killing side of things. One of my top priorities would be from a treatment perspective. Medically assisted treatment has been proven to be one of the most effective ways to help people start down the road of recovery. Today, you need a waiver to prescribe buprenorphine or methadone, yet you don't need a waiver to prescribe oxycodone, which is the type of medication that gets you addicted. So I think you need to look at things there. And then outside of the illicit trade, there's a lot that happens. It started by the big pharma offering these drugs that they said were safe and aren't. So I think prescription drug monitoring programs, looking at physician dispensing, and keeping an eye on the industry and making sure agencies like the FDA are approving things in the right way are steps that we should take in that area.
Free trader or protectionist? Where are you when it comes to trade?
I don't think either extreme is helpful. I think it's been good for us to look at the trade agreements that we have. From what I understand, the most recent changes in NAFTA is more of a change of the cover of it, so to speak, potentially helping the U.S. auto workers a little bit and U.S. dairy workers. I think tariffs are a very blunt instrument that can quickly spiral out of control. So I do think trade's very important. I think it needs to be fair trade, so I think that's probably where I'd stand more in the middle of that.
Mr. Green.
So in my business for the last 20 years, I've been on the front lines of what I like to call the undeclared trade war. The fact of the matter is we have these trade agreements worldwide. The United States always abides by them. Very strict laws. As a business, I have to abide by everything, you know, customs puts in front of me, and we do. But other countries, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, they don't. And so while ultimately I believe that, you know, I'm a free trader, just in principle, but at the same time, I think it's very important that we send a message to, you know, the rest of the world that the era of, you know, we'll abide by the agreement, but you don't have to is over. And so, in a short term, to send a message to let people know, you know, that there's a new playing field, and you're going to have to abide by whatever agreements we make. I think that's very important, and so I can support it in the short term.
Very good. Term limits, yes or no, for members of Congress?
I would vote for term limits.
Okay. Is there until there is a constitutional amendment, or if there's a constitutional amendment, do you plan to pledge yourself to your own term limits if you support them, or do you go by the laws as they exist now and keep those doors open?
So my son is 8 years old today, and I will absolutely be out of Congress before he's through high school.
Okay. Mr. Mullen, same question.
I'm not completely there in term limits, but I'm leaning towards that. One of the reasons is I think there's value of experience, but given the state of the government as it is, I think that term limits is the thing that's time has come. I think it's premature to say what my tenure in Congress would be. I'm not going there for the long term. Right now, that's my point of view, so I wouldn't anticipate that I would be there much longer than what Rick had just said with his son.
Your thoughts on members of Congress who leave Congress and then become lobbyists?
I think that's a big problem. I've signed what's called the candidate's contract, and that would restrict me from participating in lobbying for, I believe, 7 years afterwards. I'm not going to Congress to be a lobbyist. I'm going to Congress because I think we need sane dialogue. I'm running as an independent because I think the party system today is not working, and approaching it from the outside makes sense. So I'm there to try to add sanity to it, not to advance a personal agenda, not to enrich myself going forward.
Mr. Green.
I will never be a lobbyist, ever. The people of Fitchburg need to understand. I already have the best job I've ever had. When I decide it's time to go, or when the people decide it's time for me to go, I'm coming back to that job. Okay, I can't serve the people of Fitchburg and the community that they love if I'm down there trying to pad my own wallet. Something like 75 or 80% of House members, the #1 vocation they have after they get out of Congress is being a lobbyist, and that has to stop. So it's not 5 years, it's not 7 years, I will never be a lobbyist.
Mr. Green, death penalty for terrorist drug kingpins and people who kill police officers. Should that be a federal crime and subject to the death penalty?
It should absolutely be a federal crime. You know, it's a tough issue for me because, in principle, I've always found myself in support of the state's right to exact the ultimate penalty. But I'm also, you know, I'm a scientist. You know, by trade, I actually built rockets before I started my company, and the empirical evidence is we've let too many people off of death row from DNA, you know, and other exonerating evidence. And at the end of the day, I can't, in good conscience, support the death penalty when empirically we see that people, you know, have been falsely accused.
A politician who is literally a rocket scientist? That's
absolutely.
That's good. Well, that would be very unique.
It's first for everything.
Mr. Mullen.
I'm not in favor of the death penalty. I think those are very serious crimes and need to be treated very seriously. But again, for many reasons that Rick stated, it's something that you can't reverse. So I'm not in favor of that.
A lot of controversy, a lot of uprisings regarding the relationship between police officers and the minority community, police shootings, cries of discrimination. Where do you stand on that issue? How do you see that issue between of police officers and their relationship with the minority community? And is there something legislatively or something you can do as a member of Congress using your bully pulpit to try to impact that issue?
Criminal justice reform is one of the issues that I'm very concerned with. Any issue where you could have the Koch brothers and the Obama administration looking to collaborate, I think there's room for improvement. The United States right now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and it disproportionately affects minority communities. So I do think there are things structurally within the system that we need to look at. I think we need to look at decriminalizing different drugs where it's appropriate. I think we need to look at things like incarceration voting rates. I think we need to look at how we integrate these folks into society. A lot of times today we are creating situations where what is supposed to be a more minor sentence ends up being a lifetime sentence as far as the economic and kind of citizenship opportunities afterwards. So I think we need to kind of look at it as a systematic as a whole.
Mr. Green?
Yeah, so criminal justice reform, I believe, look, I want to build a lot of roads and bridges in this district, Route 2, you know, and we're going to have a lot of great jobs, a lot of great construction jobs. There's a lot of folks incarcerated on some of these minor abuse. You talk about, you know, it goes to mental health, the opioid crisis, a lot of these folks to feed an addictive habit, creating, you know, committing petty crimes. And I think we need to look at those folks and make sure we create a pipeline for those folks into, you know, good, productive jobs so they become productive members of society. And again, I look at all the construction jobs that we need to fix our ailing infrastructure. I think it's the perfect opportunity for the government to act in a way to give these folks something so that when they're coming out, they have something to look forward to.
Massachusetts voters 2 years ago voted to decriminalize, legalize recreational marijuana. Other states are following suit. Colorado was the first one. This creates a conflict with federal law. Is it time for Congress to decriminalize recreational marijuana and leave it to the states?
So the first thing I do when I go down there is I take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution and federal law. So you have to take something like, take this very seriously. But I take a step back. I think right now the biggest problem is the opioid crisis and the fentanyl, and people are dying off of fentanyl. Ultimately, I don't care what someone does in the privacy of their own home. Okay, if you're an adult, consenting adult, you're in your own home. What you do is your business. I don't want the government, in our homes, in our businesses, telling us what to do. But at the same time, when we're in the midst of this opioid epidemic where people are literally dying from fentanyl and overdosing, I think now may be the wrong time to look at that.
Mr. Mullen.
I do think there needs to be consistency between federal and local. I've had discussions with people on the campaign trail. One gentleman ended up losing his job. He tested positive and his employer fired him, even though under Massachusetts law he was okay. Things like medical marijuana is having a harder time getting off the ground because businesses are not able to get the financing that they need because of the federal laws that are in place. And then as Rick's point on the opioid crisis, there is some evidence, it's early on because since marijuana hasn't been legal, the studies aren't fully vetted, where that is a potential alternative from a painkiller perspective. So I do think there's value in having consistency in that area, and I think it's an important thing to move forward, remove some of the confusion.
When it comes to improving health care in this country, is the solution found in the private sector or by moving toward a single-payer system?
I'd be in favor of a single-payer system. My background professionally is working for a managed care company in the workers' compensation space. There's a lot of complexity in the world today from where you're connecting the systems and so forth, and I think single payer helps with that. I think it helps with negotiating power. I don't think single payer is the only answer though. Right now the United States has over 50% higher costs than other OECD industrialized nations. Part of that, and we don't have the same outcomes. A lot of times we have worse outcomes. So I think we need to be able to share information more. I think we need to look more of a wellness model, things like ACOs, where you're incenting people to deliver better outcomes and not just a fee-for-service model. So I think it's a big mix of things together.
Mr. Green?
Yeah, so single payer, I think everyone needs to be, understand single payer also means single decider. Do you really want the government making all your health care decisions? And I would talk specifically to seniors when we talk about Medicare for all. Some of the folks in this race may say that they want that, or say it's the ultimate goal. You have 44 million seniors on Medicare today, all of whom played by the rules their whole life, paid into this system. Okay, and now you're talking about taking 270 million folks, most of whom haven't paid into the system at all because of their age, or have only partially paid into the system because they've only been in the workforce for a little bit. So you want to take 270 million people and dump them into a system with 44 million people. Everyone knows, and seniors should know, that the only way that that's possible is by rationing care. And I will absolutely not allow that to happen. I will make sure that Medicare is solvent for our seniors. And then ultimately, if you look at things like eye surgeries or certain plastic surgeries, things like that, the cost keeps coming down and the quality of care keeps going up. I'm a cancer survivor, and I have someone in my family who has a chronic disease. So I understand that the key here is you want better health outcomes, increase quality, and reduce cost. Okay, there's a way to do that using free enterprise system. You look at the auto insurance model where you can take something to an in-network provider, or you can get cash and then you can shop it around. Just that simple act of giving the consumer choice. My father had a hip replacement. He went to Lowell General Hospital. He should be able to go to a website and see, what's their infection rate, what's their cost versus other, other providers. And those are the kind of things I think we need to do. Introduce consumer choice for the patient, and that's what's going to drive quality up and cost down.
Good. The budget deficit spiraling out of control, our annual budget deficit pushing close to $1 billion. How do you, as a member of Congress, what do you do in terms of either cutting spending or raising revenue to get the budget deficit under control, or is that even a priority for you as a member of Congress?
Absolutely. I will not vote for any budget that does not systematically bring down the budget deficit. Ultimately, I'd like us to get back into balance. I realize that's not going to happen overnight, but each one has to be better than the last. A lot of what's going on down there, again, we talk about roads and bridges and building them, and the component of federal regulation. The prior question on health care, over half to 2/3 of our health care costs are now administrative. Okay? The internet has reduced the cost in the private sector, but somehow government and higher education and certain things where it's basically just the exchange of information, which the internet should be bringing the cost down, that hasn't happened. We need to totally look at the way we're delivering our goods and services. We've done it in the private economy, and the public sector needs to catch up to bring down that cost.
Do you believe in a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution?
Ultimately, yes. There needs to be some kind of 2/3 override in case of national catastrophe or war or things like that. But we need to do more to bring our fiscal house in order.
Mr. Mullen.
To answer the last question first, I'm not in favor of a balanced budget amendment. I think that as a nation and government, there are times when deficit spending makes sense. As far as bringing the deficit down, I think it's a big priority. We're over $20 trillion in debt right now. We're passing that on to our children. That's not something that's sustainable. I was very disappointed in the most recent tax cut as far as where that went and how it was funded. That $1 trillion was added to the deficit. I would much prefer it, as Rick's talked about, with infrastructure investment. I think that's a much better use of borrowing. So I think we need to look at those things. I do think there are a lot of opportunities, like Rick mentioned, to use existing resources within the government. I work in IT, and one of the things we have a concept of is a service. So service is that function that you're delivering. You don't want to have to redeploy that in like 6 different applications. The same is true in different government organizations. I was talking to somebody who is disabled, who's a veteran, and because of their age, they got bounced around to 6 different places in the government because the Veterans Administration provided one thing, Social Security provided another thing, another organization provided another. I think we need to look and figure out how we deliver those services in a way that makes sense and gain some of the benefits within the existing system.
If you are elected to Congress, which committee will you ask to be assigned to? I believe you're going to be on 2 committees. Which ones will you be asked to be assigned to and why?
The 2 would be education and workforce and government oversight. The oversight and government, as I've mentioned, as an independent, one of my main issues is electoral reform. I think we need to figure out ways to have more people participate in government, make sure that we expand and allow everybody who has access to vote to encourage them to vote. And then on the education and workforce, I think in this part of the country we have I think 8 colleges within our district. We have a lot in the Boston area and a lot of more modern industries. So I think that makes a lot of sense to best benefit the residents of the district.
Mr. Green.
Transportation and infrastructure, I think, is the obvious one because we're going to fix Route 2 and we're going to make it better for the people of Fitchburg. But the other one is commerce and energy. And the reason for that is that's our energy infrastructure is failing as well. You look at what happened in Lawrence and Andover. I'm very concerned there, again, with my experience with pressure systems and building rockets. They've got something like 8,500 customers, and they have to test all these pressure regulators at folks' homes. And if you think of it, it's like blowing up a big balloon. When you blow it up and some pop, and those are the explosions, which is horrible. But the ones that didn't, they contract, they come back. They may test out today, and they may say, oh, this is fine, it still works. Okay, but it's now been exposed to a pressure well beyond its design life. And so instead of lasting 20 or 30 years like it's supposed to, it may only last 2 or 3 years. So I'm critically worried that over the next 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to have more gas leaks, more fires, and heaven forbid, even in possibly more explosions. And I think it's vital we have someone in Congress who understands not only how to fix our infrastructure, but what can happen when we don't do the proper maintenance and our infrastructure falls into disrepair.
We are recording this on Saturday morning. Later on, there will be a vote in the United States Senate on the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point. He will be confirmed. Should he be confirmed, though, in your opinion, and why or why not?
Well, look, again, what's going on down there in D.C., so much of it is just a circus. And I'm not running to join the circus. The reality is I'm running for the House. The House is supposed to be the people's house, concerned with the local issues that help people, showing people how the government helps in their daily lives, their daily commute, roads and bridges, the opioid epidemic, better jobs. As a member of the House, I wouldn't have a vote. And this is something that will happen before I get down there. I don't think it's at all beneficial to comment on that.
What impact do you think his appointment would have on the Supreme Court going forward from an ideological standpoint?
Again, it's all conjecture, and I don't like to think about these things. It's a constitutional process. The process has been followed, and I think he'll become a member of the court like any others, and he'll decide based on his best judgment.
Very good, Mr. Mullen. Your thoughts on Judge Kavanaugh?
First, on the process itself, it's become way too divisive. I think both Republicans and Democrats did not handle this well. This is not something that should have been tried on national television, having a sexual assault survivor have to go through their stories, not having due process as far as Judge Kavanaugh goes. I'm not privy to what the FBI investigation turned up. I'm not a sitting U.S. Senator, so I didn't get to see those. So I don't know that I could provide a full decision on that. As far as going forward in ideology, I hope as a Supreme Court Justice, he's looking to apply the law equally and fairly to all. I think that's what we're looking from our Supreme Court Justices for.
Very good. Closing statements. Mr. Green, you can look into the camera and tell the voters why you.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. I'd like to speak to the people of Fitchburg and let you know that I am committed to serving you and your interests. As I said, I will never be a lobbyist. I'm not going to go down there to pad my own wallet. I want to take care of the issues that concern you. Fixing roads and bridges, making Route 2 a viable alternative, making sure we can create economic development here in Fitchburg and the western part of the district. But I want to make one promise to you. When I go down there, I will be the most effective member of Congress for the people of Fitchburg and this district since Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Mullen, why you?
Thank you for having me tonight. I want to start off with a number, 55%. 55% is the number of registered voters in this state that are unenrolled in a political party. That's a majority that's been growing over the last few years, which shows that people are looking for alternatives to the two-party system. People are looking to make an independent choice on their election, on their candidate, and their issues. Now, I agree that having principles to guide you is important, that organizing around a common goal is a great way to enact change, but I don't think the two-party system is doing that today. I think people are more interested in getting reelected and beating the other side. I got into this race because I think it's too divisive, and I think big money is putting our democracy at risk. I think we need to find areas where we can find common ground and work together. As an IT professional, my responsibility has been to bring together multiple constituencies so they can develop systems and solutions that work. I've had operational and strategic responsibilities, so I know the importance of a bold and aspirational vision, but I also know you need a tactical plan to get there. You also need to keep the lights on for your customers and deliver the services day to day that they expect. I also got in the race because I think perfect has gotten in the way of good. I think we need to be able to find those areas where we have common ground, make those changes, adjust for what's not working, and move forward. So when we apply universal background checks, they're not going to solve the gun violence problem, but they are going to save lives. Removing the barriers to medically assisted treatment is not going to cure the opioid crisis, but it is a big, important step in the right direction. Allowing Medicare to negotiate with drug companies isn't going to fix healthcare, but is going to give seniors the access to the healthcare that they need. So I'm going to finish today with a question that I got on the campaign trail, and it's probably the hardest one that I have to answer. Can an independent win? I say yes. I say now is the time. Massachusetts is the place. Those 55% of independent voters, an open-minded citizenry that elects Democratic legislatures and a Republican governor, and now a common-sense independent candidate on the ballot. I ask on November 6th for you to join me, and we can be independent together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. We have about another minute or so. You both were amazing in being succinct in your answers. So just lighten up question a little bit. Do you have a favorite memory so far on the campaign trail, a favorite moment?
I never tire talking about when I jumped in the Merrimack River.
That was a great commercial.
We had so much fun in filming. I wish I had filmed it. We could have done a documentary on what it took. I actually couldn't get the camera crew to the other side, so I had to swim almost all the way over and all the way back. So it was a lot of fun.
So for the record, it wasn't a stunt double. It was really you.
I'm the cheapest stunt double in political commercials today.
Now, is that a twin brother? Because you look
we're
really alike in the
3 years
car.
apart. But I may have him out on the trail if no one can recognize the difference.
Like that movie Dave. I don't know if you ever watched that. They had the body double for the president. How about you?
Maybe not lighthearted, but it's been nice sharing with the kids different opportunities for them to meet people and learn about the process. And it's just great talking to people. As an independent, I think people feel comfortable opening up to me and not assuming that I'm coming in with one way of thinking about things. So it's been really good to hear from different people in that regard.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us in our debate series on Flap TV. Coming up this Thursday, we have back-to-back debates at 7 p.m. We have incumbent State Representative Stephen Hay, who will be debating his challenger, Elmer Eubanks. And then after that, we will have the only debate of this campaign season between incumbent State Senator Dean Tran and his opponent, Leominster City Councilor Susan Chalifoux-Zephyr. Then on October 26th, we are going to welcome United States Congressman Jim McGovern back to the set here at Flap TV, along with his opponent, Republican Tracy Lavorne. So that's going to do it for this debate. Thank you to our guest, Rick Green.
Thank you.
Mike Mullen. Make sure you get out there and vote, read up on all the candidates and all the ballot questions. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Great job.
Thank you.